Well, let's speak now to Kevin Brennan, the Labour MP for Cardiff West, who sits on the Digital, Culture, Media and Sport Committee at the Commons. Good morning, Kevin.
Bore da, Nick.
Well, it's been an extraordinary 24 hours, hasn't it, in many respects. First of all, what do you make of it all?
Well, I think the BBC's management's handling of all of this has been utterly pathetic, to be honest with you. It's taken something relatively trivial, a sports pundit giving their opinion about politics, and turned it into an existential crisis for the BBC and a major issue. And I really think that it didn't need to come to this. The management have lost the dressing room, to use the sporting analogy, completely, with all the shutdown of all the BBC sports programmes yesterday. And because there's so much running scared of accusations from certain right-wing newspapers and right-wing politicians about impartiality, they've stretched the line so far that we've got to this ridiculous situation.
Well, hold on. Impartiality, as you know, is central to the BBC, isn't it?
It is. And, you know, Nick, if you were to come on this programme and start talking about government immigration policy or whatever it was that you wanted to talk about and given your political opinions, we'd all be concerned, and rightly so. But where do you draw the line with this? Gary Lineker, what does it matter what Gary Lineker says or thinks? He's just a sports pundit. You know, where do you draw the line? I mean, you could be Alan Sugar on The Apprentice. Nothing's been done about him. It could be Carol Vorderman on BBC Radio Wales. It could be, one of the presenters on Dragon's Den, and Deborah Meaden and so on. People, are entitled to have their political opinions and to say so outside of BBC programmes if they are not political and news presenters.
Yeah, take your point. And I guess
that this has just got ridiculous. And, what did the BBC management expect to happen when they suspended Gary Lineker and then, put the spin on it and said he'd step back? I mean, people are not fools. They can see what's going on. And it's a ridiculous situation. And really, the management need to take a long, hard look at themselves and find a way out of this mess.
I suspect they weren't expecting the response that they got. I'm not sure anyone was expecting things to play out in the way that they did. Look, I mean, I take your point about...
But why not, though? I mean, these are highly paid executives. Why hadn't they worked out what the likely outcome was of effectively suspending, the BBC's top sports presenter?
Well, maybe, but it's unprecedented. It's unprecedented territory. This, isn't it? Football punditry and government policy on
unprecedented territory with this ludicrous decision.
Just in terms of, I take your point on the presenters, and you can take your pick on what other people have said over this. Just to take the Gary Lineker situation, he is so high profile. He goes in with, delves into possibly the most sensitive party political matter at the moment, highly sensitive, using potentially inflammatory language. It is a difficult situation for the BBC here, for a man who's entirely associated with the BBC, except he is a freelancer.
The BBC has a quote about freedom of speech carved on the wall of its headquarters from George Orwell. And anybody who's ever read George Orwell would know what he would have thought of this ludicrous situation the BBC's got itself into, because it's running scared of people who call themselves advocates of free speech in the press. But as soon as someone ventures an opinion they don't like, they want to shut them down. Look, I completely agree. The BBC has to have impartiality around its news and its current affairs and programs like Question Time and programs like this and so on. But let's be clear about this. I think people are entitled to have their opinions, and they're entitled to publicly say so if they are not directly involved in BBC News and current affairs coverage, unless it's an extremely extreme example where somebody is breaking the law, expressing racist viewpoints and so on, which are things, which are beyond the pale in any case, because they have the ability
is this content or principle, though? If Gary Lineker had said, well done, Suella Braverman, immigration policy is a mess, we've got to tighten up the borders of this country, and the BBC had pulled in, you wouldn't have had a problem with that, though, would you?
Well, of course, I would have had a problem with him being pulled. I wouldn't have agreed with him. I don't agree with everyone.
You would you? Isn't this not just the fact that you agree with Gary Lineker?
People are entitled to express their opinions about things, and if he'd said he thought the government's policy was a good one, then I wouldn't have had a problem. With that. He's entitled to his opinion. I mean, we're running scared these days, it seems to me, of being upset by other people's opinions about things far too much. I mean, there is a line, and we know what the line is around freedom of speech. You can't, go into a cinema and shout fire, or threaten to kill somebody and all those sorts of things. But within reason, it seems to me that people who are not directly involved in BBC current affairs programs ought to be able to express. But what we really ought to focus on now is what BBC management going to do about this. What they've managed to do is draw attention back onto the whole controversy about Richard Sharp, the chair, and the fact that he was appointed, and during that appointment process, he was helping to arrange a loan for the then Prime Minister. I mean, that is a really significant issue, which does have a political context, because his appointment is made by the Prime Minister and subject to scrutiny by my committee, for example, the Culture Committee. Those are real issues around this, but they've suddenly drawn attention back onto this by a ludicrous obsession with what Gary Lineker says. And by the way, it's never obsessed with what anyone else says.
Will your committee look into this?
Well, I'm sure at some point we will. We haven't committed to do so at this stage, but we regularly have BBC management in front of us and others. So I'm sure at some point the committee will be discussing this matter in public. I mean, I'm not speaking for the committee here. I'm speaking for myself when I say I just think that this has been utterly mishandled by BBC management. And what they ought to do now is, undo this suspension, say they're going to look again at these guidelines, which have drawn us into this situation by an over-interpretation of them, and perhaps then viewers and can enjoy Match of the Day again.
Okay.
And the BBC can stop responding to every headline in the Daily Mail.
Well, we shall see what happens. Kevin Brennan, thank you very much for your time this morning.